Well, good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, August 4th, 2022, and this is the Law and Policy Committee meeting of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Baker. Chair Matich.
Aye. We'll go ahead and proceed to item number 1. This is public comment for items not on today's agenda. Do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda? Hearing and seeing none, we'll proceed to item 2, approval of the July 12th, 2022 committee minutes. Commissioner Baker, any edits or comments on the meeting minutes?
No, thank you. Move to approve.
Second, any public comments on item 2? Hearing and seeing none, Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker.
Aye.
Chair Matich.
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, we'll proceed to item 3 then. This is our legislative update with Senior Fppc Legislative Counsel, Lindsay Nakano. Good morning, Ms. Nakano.
Good morning, Chair Matich and Commissioner Baker. We have a hard stop at 10 o'clock this morning, so I wanted to start with the supplemental page of the legislative report that lists the Commission's bill positions. I know the Commission has discussed possibly taking positions on some of the remaining bills, so I'd like to offer this time for some additional discussion from the committee. I'll turn our attention now to the first bill for which the Commission has not taken a position. That's AB 975 by Assemblymember Rivas, relating to electronic filing of SEIs, statements of economic interest, and changes to the gift rules. There was a lot of discussion about this bill at last month's Commission meeting, and I wanted to make some clarifications about what the bill would and would not do relating to the gift portion of the bill. The bill would not change the deadline for reporting of gifts. Gifts are reported on statements of economic interest, which are due annually on March 1st or April 1st, and after assuming or leaving office. What the bill would do is increase the time that a person has to donate, return, or pay down a gift. When a person returns, donates, or pays down the value of a gift beyond the reporting threshold, the gift is no longer considered a, quote, gift under the Act, and the recipient is no longer required to report the gift on their statement of economic interest. Because the bill gives people more time to decide what to do with the gift, the result of this bill may be that there are more returns, more donations, and more reimbursements. If this does in fact occur, there would be less reportable gifts. I'll now turn the presentation over to Executive Director Galena West, who has some additional information relating to the gift rules.
Good morning. As Lindsay was saying, there's a lot of issues with this proposed bill, and one of the big things is this is blowing up an exception. Basically, you're giving 4 times the amount of time to buy down a gift, and I'm looking at this with my experience of being here for 20 years and 6 years as the enforcement chief, and one of the purposes of the Act is that the public officials' assets and incomes have to be disclosed to show effect on their actions and influence. And what the Commission's done and the legislature the last couple of years is really tighten the rules about disclosure to be able to show influence. And this goes the opposite direction. So when you think about the expansion of the behest rules to show influence, you can think about the bill this year that's talking about expanding the 84308 conflict of interest rules with campaign contributions, expansion of that. It gives a 30-day return for contributions in order to buy down in respect, and that's what the existing exception does. So what happened was the statute says, you can't do it all. You can't get gifts and be influenced. You have to disclose them so that people know. But being reasonable, that exception was written giving you 30 days for mistakes and for inadvertent excess over the gift limit. And when you have this 30 days to remedy, then it makes the rule reasonable. Also like the mass mailer rule, where it says no mass mailer can go out at public expense. But then we realize, well, that's an absolute prohibition, so you can't send out checks that have the signature of the public official on it. So then the exceptions to the rule were written. But the exceptions are narrow in all of these instances in order to further the purposes of the Act. And by doing this and making it 4 times, 4 paychecks to buy something down, in order for something to not be disclosed on an SEI, is not furthering what the disclosure provisions of the Act are about. You can look at other examples of travel. hold on a second. Sorry, holding back a cough. When you have the travel restrictions, those were expanded, or the travel disclosure, that was expanded a couple of years ago in order to disclose when a nonprofit provides travel, then if a specific donor gave a certain amount, there's a form filed that actually shows who accompanied the public official on that travel. So if you're allowing this public official to buy down this travel, then you're obscuring that disclosure as well. You could obscure disclosure by lobbyists, and also the timing for when a lobbyist has to file a report versus when it's reported on an SEI or now not reported on an SEI. So getting rid of the disclosure of gifts may seem like not too big a deal, but really when you look at disclosure as a purpose of revealing influence, then you're losing all of the opportunities to see who is gaining access and therefore influence on the public officials. So just wanted to show the domino effect that could happen if disclosure is really kind of gutted to where you have 4 paychecks to buy something down that you don't necessarily want the public to see. So just something to think about.
Ms. West, appreciate that. Tono, anything further on the gift portion of this bill?
Excuse me, nothing further on the gift portion, but I believe our General Counsel Bainbridge has some information relating to the Statement of Economic Interest portion of the bill.
All right.
Good morning, Dave Bainbridge, General Counsel. Yeah, I was just going to say originally when this bill idea came about, this was our portion of the bill that we were pushing for, and the goal was to require everyone who currently files with us their SEI to file electronically. We have an electronic system that we've had for a number of years, and quite a few people do take advantage of the electronic filing. The bill was to require electronic filing for all. Currently, people still have the option of filing on paper. Our thinking was it's in 2022, it was 2020, I think, when we started on this. It doesn't make sense for people to be filing 2 different ways. We have an electronic system. We should be using it. So that was the goal, and we had quite a hand in drafting a lot of that portion of this bill, the rewriting of 87-500, again, with the goal of not changing where people file, but instead just requiring those who currently file with us to file using our electronic system, with the ultimate goal, I think, of all SEIs being filed electronically, just because it's easier for the filer, it makes the records easier to access, all of these advantages of filing electronically. So that is what is intended with the changes to 87-500. So it looks like a lot, but it really is making that change of requiring filing, everyone to file, who files with us currently, to file electronically. The second part that I think would change the status quo is in 87-500.3. Pulling up the bill language right now. It's the subdivision D2B, which says that only 87-200 filers' statements could be posted online. Currently, there's no prohibition on who can be posted online by the Fppc. All SEIs are public records, so anyone who wants one can request one from us. Currently, in regulation, the Fppc requires itself to post all SEIs that are filed with us for elected officials. There's no requirement or statement regarding employees or appointees who also file with the Fppc. That's to say there's nothing that requires us to post it, and there's nothing that prohibits us from posting. Our current policy is we just post the SEIs for elected officials that we receive. The other ones we have on file here and are available upon request. So what this bill would do would add a prohibition that doesn't currently exist. It would prohibit us from putting statements of electronic interest for those filers who are not 87-200 filers that file with us online. So who is that? It's a few different categories. So these are anyone who's a code filer, as we call them, that files with us under 87-300. So if you look at the draft language of 87-500, A2, let's see, it's subparagraphs, big D, big E. So those are members of a state licensing or regulatory board, persons appointed by a state board or commission. L, the head of local government agencies who are not elected, so appointed city managers, those sort of positions. M is designated employees of the legislature, so all the staffers at the legislature. And then N, joint powers insurance agency employees. So kind of a hodgepodge of people who are 87,300 filers that file with us. This law would now prohibit us from making those statements available online. I think this conflicts with the overall goal of making all of this electronic and making it more available. There's been a number of laws passed in the last few years requiring local agencies to post various statements online to make them accessible on the internet. So I don't think this particular provision is in line with what we're trying to accomplish here.
Thank you, Mr. Bainbridge. I think summarize then, if I'm understanding staff's comments correctly. Ms. West, in your judgment, what you're conveying to this committee is that staff believes the gift provisions would actually reduce transparency, essentially by allowing public officials to erase public gifts, or erase gifts that they receive and avoid public disclosure of those in a way that doesn't exist currently under the law. Right?
That's correct. And if the identified purpose is to have more time for certain disclosures, that's a second part of the bill that actually just shortens the time to where lobbyists have to notify. So if that was actually the purpose of the bill, then that one part we could support.
Right. No, I assumed that part. And then Mr. Bainbridge, with respect to SEIs, if I'm understanding you correctly, staff's view is that that portion of the bill also reduces transparency because it creates a prohibition on this agency to make public information that we receive from certain appointed officials and other folks with respect to their statements of economic interest. Is that right?
That's right, potentially. Right now, we don't post that information online, but there is no prohibition from doing it in the future. And my understanding, at least of the current commission, is that's the direction they'd like to head in terms of enhancing transparency that's available to people electronically.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. I looked back and I couldn't find anything, at least in the written record, but what is your general understanding of why the commission, when we decided to start putting statements of economic interest on our website, we began by our regulations with elected officials. But it's not phrased as a prohibition. So is the correct way of understanding that regulation is that's where we began because that's kind of a manageable data set to begin with, and that was the first step on a larger plan to build out transparency on our website then?
Yeah, I think that would make sense, and with the thought that the elected officials are probably the most important, so let's start by putting those up. I think this requirement came about around when, or maybe a little before we had our system built. So I think it was a let's see how this goes type thing, and let's get the most important ones up first.
I appreciate that background. Mr. Cano, anything further on this bill that you wanted to bring our attention to?
Nothing further for me, but I open the floor to the committee for discussion or questions.
All right. Well, Commissioner Baker, you've heard the concerns raised by our staff that this bill reduces transparency in at least two ways. And if I also understand Ms. West, she believes it's also contrary to the spirit and intent of the act, which raises potential legal concerns as well. Commissioner Baker, do you have questions or comments on the bill?
I do, and thank you. And just by way of reminder for the public, excuse me, Ms. Nakano has brought this bill forward to us multiple times over the last year. We've encouraged both the disclosure of information as well as online, because we're kind of about more transparency in the most accessible way possible. And I and my fellow commissioners in full commission meeting have expressed a concern about provisions of the bill that seem to be going backwards. I mean, in my time on the this commission, I haven't seen us support something that actually reduces what could be more transparency and more accessibility of that information. We're coming to the point where the legislature is at the end of its year session, and we've tried, as I recall, Ms. Nakano multiple times reaching out to the author with suggestions for amendments, and I feel like, would you say we've been transparent ourselves about concerns with the author's office? Am I remembering correctly? And is there any update on communications with the author about changes to the bill?
The commission's concerns have been communicated to the author's office, and at this point, there are no planned amendments that I'm aware of.
Okay. Going into this level of depth, and I thank Director West and Council Bainbridge for the very, history and the background on it. To me, I want to also recite a bit why it's important that staff, some of the people that Mr. Bainbridge has said would not be as transparent and available. These are licensing boards and staff in the legislature, like your director, your chief of staff. They are the ones who often meet with interests that would like a member to vote a certain way, and having less transparency about what they may be receiving. I'm not trying to impugn anyone's ethics, but it's about that. The appearance of influence is very, very important. It's not just about electeds, but about these folks who are in a real decision-making process. And so I wouldn't want to dilute for the public what we have there. That provision concerned me. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever expressed that with our colleagues. I don't think it's really registered with me. With the gift timing period, I wonder, either Mr. Bainbridge or Director West, if you can play out a scenario where if we have this extended time now from 30 days to quite a bit later, doesn't that allow the elected official to make use of that gift and get some benefits from it that they can kind of make up for months later, and potentially after a vote, like maybe it's a development that their local official is voting on? Does that allow them to basically make use of a gift and get the benefit of it even after a critical vote? It might be a leading question. That's the lawyer in me. Have you seen scenarios like that, or from either your enforcement experience? Is that based on what the language is that what this bill could be making possible?
Yeah, well, the gift has to be unused to be able to be returned. That's one of the criteria for returning it under current law and under this proposed bill. But it kind of depends on the nature of a gift. If it's a tangible item, golf club, for example, that's something you use, and maybe you could tell it had been used or it hadn't. There's other items that it's if you get a free meal, that's used when you receive it. So technically, no, you could, if it was a car that was over the limit, you couldn't make use of that by driving it around. But they could get, in certain ways, can get the benefit of receiving a gift and have it for the up to 4-month period, and then buy it down and not have to report it.
I'm envisioning
something just publicly,
please.
just to chime in real quick, because you use the example. Well, Commissioner Baker asked a question about use, right? And I think that's easy to understand, that you have to pay it down or return it before you use it in the context of a golf club, right? It's a tangible item you can put in the closet, and you're not making use of it. Then you mentioned a meal. So with respect to a meal, let's just say that a developer with business before a city council member wants to take them out to a very fancy dinner, which exceeds the $520 gift limit. At that time that dinner occurs, under existing law, that council member would have 30 days to pay back their portion of the dinner to bring it below a reporting threshold or over the limit gift, correct?
Correct.
So, but now that's 30 days. That's a pretty short amount of time. Under this proposal, they would have up to 4 months, depending on when in the calendar quarter they had that dinner. So a sequence of events could occur feasibly under this bill where month 1, they have the dinner with the developer who has business before them. Month 2, the item comes before the council. At that point, because there's still time for the council member to pay it down, they haven't technically accepted that gift legally, even though I think most people in the public would think they have. That would mean they don't have to recuse themselves from that decision because of the gift. They don't have to disclose the gift. They could vote on the matter. Month 3, they could actually have a fundraiser And that developer could contribute to that candidate, that council member. And because, generally speaking, candidates can use campaign funds to pay down gifts, they would be able to use that contribution to then pay down the gift they received in month one. And at the end of the day, there is no public disclosure of that dinner and that opportunity to influence that official on a decision they voted for that person. Isn't that right?
I think that's right, because the proposed legislation excludes gifts that are returned or bought down from the definition of a gift. So if the gift is what would potentially trigger a conflict of interest based on the decision, you wouldn't have a gift in this case because it's not by definition a gift.
Right, and so that's why I think, you know, when we think about this isn't, I think, Director West, you sort of led with this, it's not as simple as, look, we're just giving a little bit of extra time to pay down the gift. The 30-day time period is actually important because it makes it very unlikely that the scenario I just laid out could ever actually occur. But if you take it from 30 days to 4 months, potentially, then we see how that pattern could emerge over time. Is that right?
For sure. And the things about gifts is it's 12-month look back. So you could have a gift that isn't technically over the limits because you get a expensive gift in December and expensive gift in January, not technically over the limits, but the 12-month look back for gifts causes you a conflict, and then you go, oh, well, I want to vote on this, so I want to make sure that I get some money over the next 4 months to buy this down because I didn't actually want people to know that I am doing a timeshare with this person or whatever it is that they want to do. So it really elevates the cost of something that can be bought down. And so then you have even more expensive gifts being bought down because you have 4 months to maybe raise funds or get paychecks or whatever. And so then how does that help anyone to know something even more expensive was bought under $50 so that it doesn't get disclosed? So I agree. It doesn't seem to further the purposes of what the exception was written for. And I think focusing on the fact that this was an exception, this 30 days to this general prohibition, saying, you know, when you get this, you have to disclose it, and that's it. And then there's this small exception to say, well, we know you're human, we know that you're going to need to get information or you make mistakes, then you're blowing up an exception.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I appreciate your example.
Didn't mean to
Not at all. I appreciate the example because the concept of being able to, the more time that you have to make a decision, and we're talking about months, about whether or not the acceptance of something is going to have a gift, gives you more time, I think, to be influenced and to work around it, to kind of manipulate a little bit. And even even if it's not manipulation, which probably sounds like a negative word, being able to raise funds to pay off something months later so that it's not a gift is, I think, not where we want to go as a commission. Again, I think we focus on greater transparency, especially online access, easier access, which implicates the staff prohibition that we talked about. But I'd like to see us enhance transparency and not go back. My concern is that there really, there hasn't been much progress, or we haven't been able to affect the bill with amendments. And it's not through Ms. Nakano's lack of great effort. We really have tried. I would suggest, and I move, that we take a position on this bill, and we've varied back and forth if we're going to do support, if amended, or oppose unless amended. I think at this point I move to oppose the legislation unless amended, and make that recommendation to the full commission.
Ms. Nakano, I just want to clarify something. I don't disagree, Commissioner Baker. I'm prepared to join in a motion that we recommend to our colleagues that we oppose the bill. Your motion, though, I think was opposed unless amended. Ms. Nakano, can you remind us? I think you told us last time there were some limitations on the variations of positions we could take and what would be communicated. So could we oppose unless amended at this point, or is it just simply oppose or support at this point?
Opposed unless amended is an option. We're not at the cutoff date for the last date for amendments, especially for PRA bills, since there's that special 12-day waiting period. But that is an option at this point. That remains an option.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, Chair,
Commissioner
I'm mindful of what I even said in the last commission meeting a week or so ago, which is the time is of the essence. I mean, this bill could come up this morning. The Senate's in session this morning. If I remember correctly, this bill's ready for the floor. It could come up on Monday, and it could come up before our next commission meeting. I hope that in good faith that won't be the case, but so I withdraw my motion and move to recommend a opposed position for the full commission.
All right, I'm going to second that. Before we actually vote on that, though, let me call for any public comment. Any public comment on the motion made by Commissioner Baker that we recommend an opposed position on AB 975. Hearing and seeing none, Ms. Linker, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, thank you. All right, Ms. Nakano, what's next?
The next bill on the list is SB 459 by Senator Allen, relating to lobbying reporting and issue lobbying advertisements. This is actually a 2-year bill that was recently revived this year and is, as of yesterday, on the suspense file in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. From what I understand, there may be amendments coming off of suspense, so I would suggest that the committee may wish to hold off on making any recommendations about a position at this time, but I'd open the floor for any discussion about how the bill appears in print currently.
Certainly makes sense to me, but Commissioner Baker, what do you think?
I agree. I think those kind of changes can happen, so I appreciate that. And I think it's August 12th, if I remember from your report, fiscal committees, or I'm not sure when the appropriate deadline is, but agree.
Right. So we'll hold 459. What's next?
Okay. The next bill is 746 by Senator Skinner. This bill relates to business entities that use their online products or services to disseminate communications for political purposes. It's my understanding for this bill as well that there may be amendments to the bill, so I would suggest similarly that the committee may wish to hold off on any recommendations today.
And that makes sense to me. Commissioner Baker?
Agree. Thank you.
And the next bill is SB 794 by Senator Glazer, relating to excess contributions. To refresh your memory, this bill would allow a committee to knowingly accept a contribution that is over the applicable limit in the Political Reform Act, as long as the committee returns the excess portion within 72 hours and does not make use of the contribution prior to returning the excess. I'll open the floor now for any discussion from the committee on this bill.
Have there been any changes since the last time we met to this bill?
No, there have been no amendments.
I think this is on SB 794, what I would say is I think the author has identified a concrete problem, and the solution that's identified in the bill is narrowly tailored enough, to my mind, that we're not doing any particular harm to transparency or contribution limits. So I'm of the view that we ought to support SB 794. Mr. Baker, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. First, I'll just disclose for full transparency, I did have a conversation with Senator Glazer himself about the legislation. I know we've had questions. What was kind of the motivation or real scenario? So I disclosed that first of all. And after our consideration of this bill a couple of times, I think I agree with you that, especially if I recall, this is we are being more narrow than the FEC in what it does, and perhaps some other states. And just understanding better, there are scenarios in which even the most sophisticated compliance-related contributors can be off by $100 through all legitimate means, and having to send the entire check back, and then it could really mess with the timing of bringing closure to that. I would be inclined to support this. I wasn't originally a little nervous about the concept of, hey, give me a check that's bigger and I'll send it back to you. But I really don't think that's what's happening here. And I think it's a very practical provision.
I will then put it in the form of a motion. I move that we recommend a support position on SB 794 to the full commission at our next meeting.
Second. Seconded that. I don't know if that got across.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on the item before we vote? Hearing and seeing none, Ms. Linker.
Commissioner Baker? Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Excellent. And last but not least, SB 1352, Ms. Nakano.
SB 1352 by Senator Allen would require candidates and committees to file a new third pre-election due 70 days before the election. As you'll recall, the bill requires 3 pre-election statements instead of the current 2, with the result being that, using the November election as an example, the activity in July and August would be reported at the end of August instead of the end of September. So that's the practical effect of the bill. And I'll pause here for any discussion from the committee.
Commissioner Baker, any thoughts on 1352?
I'm not inclined to take a position on this one, but welcome your thoughts.
I think on this one, if memory serves, there have been some changes to the bill over the last few months. And I think what I would like is to hold our consideration of taking a position on this to the full commission and allow the full commission as a whole to consider the final version together and decide what, if any, position we want to take. So unless there's an objection, Commissioner Baker, I'd say we hold this one.
No objection. I think that's appropriate. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Nakano.
The remaining bills on the supplemental page have been amended since the commission voted to support them. However, it's my analysis that the changes don't affect the core of these bills, and I'd categorize the amendments as largely technical, clarifying, or otherwise minor. Unless the committee feels otherwise, I wouldn't recommend a reconsideration of our position.
Thank you. I'm happy to accept your recommendation that we maintain our support positions on each of the 4 bills listed here. Commissioner Baker.
I would agree. Thank you.
And nothing further from me.
All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Nakano. I actually had a question for you on AB 775. Do you have any follow-up information for us at this point?
Yes, we've been working closely with the author's office. They've been very diligent at working on the language and reaching out to stakeholders. We've made a lot of progress, and I expect that we will see amendments shortly.
Okay. Would you anticipate receiving those when you say, put you on the spot? Are we going to have those sufficiently ahead of time so that you would be able to brief the full commission, you think, in 2 weeks on those?
Double check the date. I believe we will have amendments in print by then.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Baker?
I just want to inquire, can you just refresh briefly what the amendment language maybe is that we're still hammering out? I know for some time we've worked on that. Can you specify, please?
I think at this point it's similar to the changes that I outlined at the previous commission meeting. One of the changes is to make an exception for, or to exclude from the bill, certain organizations that collect donations from members through things like membership dues. Another change is to require that if a contribution is collected in violation of the provision, the bill, then it would need to be returned within a certain period of time. And there's also a provision relating to when or what constitutes a violation, or whether it's the first solicitation or whether it's every subsequent collection. So there's some clarification there as to what constitutes a violation. And I believe those are the main substantive changes.
Thank you. So still along the same areas and topics, it's just nailing down the particular language. And thank you for continuing. You know, it was a year ago that we really started our own advocacy for legislation like this. And of course, was disappointed that it went to the inactive file or whatever. Didn't make it across the finish line last time. So thank you for continuing to represent us well and working with the author. I'm grateful for the author to do that. we'll look forward to getting this recurring contribution bill on the governor's desk, hopefully, fingers crossed.
All right, any further questions, Commissioner Baker, for Ms. Nakano?
No, thank you.
I have just one process question. So we've now taken a position as a commission, as a whole, on a number of bills, and we've made recommendations today, which may be adopted by the commission the next time we meet. Just process-wise, when the commission takes a position on a bill, and that bill, does pass through the legislature and ends up before the governor, our process is you would then communicate the position that the commission took with respect to the legislation to the governor's office. We don't need to come back and reauthorize that. That is just part of our normal process.
Right, I think that's been the commission's process to send letters to the governor that express either a support or opposed position.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. All right, great. Anything else for Ms. Nakano then, Commissioner Baker?
No, thank you. Really appreciate the work. I know this is one of the busiest times of year, so thank you.
We have reached the end of our agenda. Commissioner Baker, I will make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, Ms. Linker?
Commissioner Baker?
Aye.
Chair Matich?
Aye.
The motion passes.
All right, thank you, everyone. We will see you in 2 weeks for our regular commission meeting.
Thank you.